Do you want to start a reef tank like this, but you're not really sure where to start? Well, I'm going to show you how to do this. I'm going to give you some basic knowledge on how to set up your first reef tank and to make sure that you do it successfully. And to recap, I bought this tank off Facebook Marketplace. I paid $120 for it, and I went over some of the stuff that you guys will need to set up your first aquarium. When I got done editing the video and I uploaded it to YouTube last week, I realized I forgot to talk about one major thing that you guys should get. And that's going to be this. This is an RODI unit, and this is very important when you're talking about doing reef tanks. And that's because this is going to purify your water in a way that there's going to be no dissolved solids in it anymore. Why is this important? The biggest reason why is because when you go to mix up salt, you're going to be adding calcium and alkalinity and magnesium and all these other elements into the water. So you want to start with pure water, as close to pure water as you can get. You don't want to mix up your salt and there already be calcium in there because you're just going to throw off your parameters. So I would get one of these. This is an RO Buddy. It's fairly inexpensive compared to a lot of other stuff. I mean, if you start looking at 4-stage and 5-stage RODI units, you're going to easily spend over $300. So this is a much cheaper option here. The replacement cartridges aren't that expensive either. You're looking at like between 35 and 40 bucks. The alternative to this is that you're going to be picking up this water from your local fish store, and you're going to be paying a premium to do that, and then you're also going to have to lug, 5-gallon buckets back and forth every time you want to do a water change. For example, with my setup, I'm going to probably need about 50 gallons of water, so imagine trying to go down to your local fish store to pick up 50 gallons of water just to start this thing up. So that's going to bring our total up to $600. Another thing that you might want to pick up is a TDS meter. This is just going to show you that the water that you made has 0 dissolved solids in it. They're about $15 to $20, so it's relatively inexpensive. Now you're going to need something to mix up the salt water in, and most people end up just using a brute trash can. You can usually find these at Walmart for around $40. I also realized that I forgot to add the price of salt, and this is going to cost about $80. At least for a box of salt that will mix up 200 gallons of water. Now you can buy, something that won't mix up as much water, but the more that you buy when it comes to salt, the cheaper it typically is. An $80 bag of salt your first year doing this will probably last almost the entire year. So this is what I got going on so far. My advice is to just try to do something, unique and not to just pile a bunch of rocks in here. You want this to kind of look halfway decent at this stage. You can see that I have open areas, and that's just so fish can swim around freely and they're not being blocked by a wall of rocks. What I'm showing here is that I kind of think that I'm going to try to mount this up on the wall somehow. Not really sure how I'm going to do that right now. I don't think silicone is a very good idea, and I don't think it'll hold very well, so I'll probably buy some magnets and just kind of figure out a way how to support that up there. So this is what the plumbing in the sump looks like. Over on the right, you can see that there's a downpipe missing, and that's just because I didn't add it at that moment. And then over to the left, you can see that that's kind of what I was talking about when doing a manifold, and that's just so I can add like a UV sterilizer or something down the road. So let's talk about mixing up salt water and how to calibrate a refractometer. And right now you can see that I'm dipping a TDS meter into RODI water, and you can see that it's near perfect RODI water. It's 1 parts per million of total dissolved solids. And so right here, I'm taking some of that RODI water and I'm actually putting it on the refractometer. And so this is kind of hard to see. So let me zoom in. So what you can see here, you can kind of see that there's darker blue and lighter blue. Well, that line where they meet, that's your reading. So you can see that the line is actually underneath 0, and that would be a negative salinity, which is impossible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to calibrate the meter to 0. So I've adjusted the refractometer, and now you can see that the reading is actually on 0. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because I'm about to use 35 parts per thousand calibration fluid, and I'm going to show you that the reading on this refractometer that's just been calibrated to 0 with RODI water, it's not going to read 35 parts per thousand. And this is just a warning that you really should get this calibration fluid because it's just going to ensure that you mix up your salt correctly. So you can see where it says 40. Underneath of that, there's a half line. So that's 35 parts per thousand. This is actually not reading 35 parts per thousand. It's actually reading closer to 32 or 33 parts per thousand. And you might think, well, that's not really a big deal. And right now, it's honestly not a big deal. The problem comes when you stack this up over time and you make this mistake over and over and over again. You might throw the salinity off in your tank by a large amount, and you might not be able to figure out what's going on with it. And simply, you've been mixing up your salt incorrectly this entire time. So let's move on. We talked about sand last week and which sand I would get and stuff like that. This was the sand that I got. So this is Seachem Ocean Direct. And the big thing behind this is this sand is supposed to be taken out of the Caribbean. And so when you're using dry rock, I definitely recommend that you put something in there that's from the ocean. And that's just to ensure that the correct bacterial biome starts up inside the tank. By doing this, you can kind of decrease your chance that you might run into some of the pest algae and just weird things that can happen when this thing's starting up. I'm pretty sure that I showed this sand on Amazon, and I would actually recommend that you go buy this sand off BRS. I believe on Amazon it was like $30 for 20 pounds of sand, and while looking at BRS, they're selling this sand in 40-pound bags for like $27. So it's cheaper, and you're getting double the sand. So you might be thinking that the tank looks kind of empty right now, and when you do this aquascape, keep that in mind. You're going to want it to kind of look empty because the idea is that you're going to fill this in with coral. So you don't want to stack these rocks all the way up to the top of the surface because your corals aren't going to really have anywhere to grow. Probably noticed that I'm using an air stone, and the reason why I'm doing that is because I don't have any of the circulation pumps hooked up. Um, I didn't have enough water at the moment to actually mix up enough to fill the tank up and fill the sump up. So the bacteria that we're trying to get to grow inside the aquarium is actually an aerobic type of bacteria, and that's what's going to convert the ammonia into nitrite and then nitrate. And so I use the word aerobic. All that means is that the bacteria actually needs oxygen in order to oxidize ammonia. Once I get the recirculating pumps on, I'm going to take that air stone out. I really wouldn't recommend that you use one because what it's going to do is it's going to create a bunch of salt spray and make a mess. I wanted to talk about how to quarantine fish during this episode, but I don't have any fish to quarantine at the moment. I went to the store and looked for some. I was going to use chromis because they're pretty cheap, but they only had one chromis at the fish store when I went. So I'll have to go next weekend and see what they have. What I have done though is I have started the cycle in my tank. So I have the beneficial bacteria in the tank from the sand. And what I'm going to use to feed the bacteria is this ammonium chloride. Now, what some people do is they'll put fish food or they'll put like a piece of shrimp in there. The problem with doing that is that stuff doesn't turn into ammonia instantly. So it kind of drags this process out. You'll end up waiting like a week or two before all of that food has actually decomposed into ammonia. So this is just a faster way at doing that. Another way that people cycle their aquarium is that they'll put a cheap fish in there, like a chromis or a damsel, something that they don't necessarily care about, and they don't really care if it dies during the ammonia cycle. Now, that's not really seen as ethical anymore, so there's not a lot of people that advocate for that. Using ammonium chloride is probably the best way to go, and I would recommend that you do the same thing. I bought a 4-ounce bottle of this and it costs less than $10. It should treat about 200 gallons, so I'm not going to need any more than this. Based on the instructions, you want to dose about half a milliliter per gallon to get up to 2 parts per million of ammonia. What I'll end up doing is I'll probably dose this once a week for the next 2 to 3 weeks until I get my fish quarantined, and then I'll put my fish in there and see how they do. What you should do is you should test to see if there's any more ammonia in the water before you do put fish into the aquarium. From my experience, I would stay away from API test kits because they're really hard to read when you actually have zero ammonia. Zero ammonia will actually look like 0.25 or so on the test kit. Uh, Saltwater is a really good brand to go with, and that's what I would recommend. With the ammonia chloride and the Salifert test kit, that brings our total up to $760. Now it's getting a little pricey at this point, but we're really almost done. Really, the last equipment that we need is a light and then probably some power heads. And then we're going to need to get some fish and we're going to need to get some coral. Unfortunately, this hobby isn't the cheapest thing to get into, but if you want something to compare the numbers that I've gave you to, just go search 50-gallon reef tank on Google, and you'll see that most of the stuff that comes up is going to be around like $1,500. And that's not with any of the stuff that I've talked about. That's like maybe with a sump, that's a tank and a stand. But that's going to be pretty much it for now. I'm going to try to get some fish to start quarantining them. I'm going to finish setting up the tank. So by the time I do the next episode, the tank should be fully up. I'll have some fish. I'll talk about how to quarantine them. I'll kind of show you how the tank is going and everything. If you want to support me in any way, you can go check out my website. I'll leave the link in the description. But I'll talk to you guys next time.